Welcome to the second in a series of informational tutorials designed to acquaint you with the changes in the recently reauthorized Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and help us to transition our programs and services to the new Act. These tutorials will give you a good working knowledge of the legislation. The first tutorial provided an overview of the entire Act. This tutorial focuses on Title II of the Act, Adult Education and Literacy. These tutorials have been adapted from presentations prepared by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. This tutorial will provide highlights of Title II, focus on the purposes of Title II, discuss 3 new activities, and broadly examine local funding considerations and the performance accountability system. Remember, specific guidance will not be available until the Departments of Labor and Education release the regulations by January 2015. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act reauthorizes the Workforce Investment Act, which was due for reauthorization in 2003. It represents the first major reform in the U.S. workforce system in over a decade. Throughout all 5 titles of WIOA, you will hear several common themes woven through the legislative language, and Title II is no exception. So let's begin by looking at some of the highlights of WIOA reform on Title II and potential impact on our local program here at CPCC. As mentioned in the first tutorial, WIOA increases coordination of core programs through submission of a unified state plan. WIOA requires states to prepare a single plan for the core programs, which include the Adult Education and Literacy Program, Dislocated Worker Adult and Youth Programs, the Wagner-Peyser Employment Program, and the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. At the local level, our funding application will need to align with the local or regional plan of these same partners. The Act also establishes common performance measures across core programs. WIOA includes 6 primary indicators of performance that will be negotiated with each state by the Secretaries of Education and Labor as part of the state plan. These 6 indicators will replace the current performance measures. While the new indicators are similar in some respects, there are some significant changes, including 2 new ones, median wage earnings and employer satisfaction. We'll examine these performance indicators more closely later in this tutorial. WIOA strengthens alignment between adult education, post-secondary education, and employers. The Act recognizes that the core purpose of adult education is to prepare individuals with the skills and knowledge needed to succeed in post-secondary education and the workforce. Career pathways are mentioned several times in the Act as the mechanism that can make these connections occur effectively. WIOA also supports educational and career advancement for incarcerated individuals. WIOA encourages a range of education and job training activities to promote successful re-entry and reduce recidivism. The percentage of funding for states to use for correctional education is increased to not more than 20% under the new Act. This means that funding for correctional education could possibly increase. The Act also codifies the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program. EL Civics was not actually included in WIA. It was a separate appropriation. WIOA reinforces support for EL Civics by including it in the Act and providing enhanced integrated services for effective participation in education, work, and civic opportunities. The Act requires the Secretary of Education to reserve 12% of Title II appropriated funds and distribute those funds to states using a formula provided for in the Act. The new program retains the focus on English language proficiency in civics education instruction and creates stronger ties to employment and the workforce system. The process North Carolina will use to distribute these funds will not be determined until the federal regulations are released. The Act encourages the establishment of a high-quality local adult education delivery system. WIOA amends the criteria that must be used in local funding applications to award federal funds to local program providers. A strong focus is placed on funding programs with documented past effectiveness. We will look at this in more detail later in this tutorial. To enhance program quality, WIOA supports professional development opportunities and innovative models to enhance adult education programs and sets aside funding for national technical assistance and research projects. Each of these 8 highlights stem from the expanded purpose of Title II. While the Act retains purposes that have been in place over 50 years of legislative history in adult education, 2 new purposes were added. The traditional purposes acknowledge the broad role adult education and literacy plays in helping adults improve employment, self-sufficiency, and in supporting the educational development of children. The importance of high school completion for adults continues to be of primary importance to achieving these broad purposes. However, Title II recognizes that completion of high school is not an end in itself, but the means to further opportunity. It adds to the purpose of high school completion the transition to post-secondary education through the use of career pathways. A new purpose statement in Title II also formalizes a role that adult education has played for decades related to assisting immigrants and English language learners learn to read, write, and speak English, adding mathematics to the scope of services. It expands the focus of English language learning by adding civics-related purposes as well. Title II creates 3 new activities that are added to the definition of adult education and literacy services and become a part of required activities for local adult education programs under the Act. First, it creates integrated education and training services that provide adult education concurrently and contextually with occupational training. Second, workforce preparation activities were added to the definition of adult education and literacy services. The definition supports teaching employability skills, services that help individuals gain basic academic, critical thinking, digital literacy, and soft skills. The Act also creates the new Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program, which was mentioned previously. So now that you have a general idea about the major changes in Title II, let's take a closer look at 2 particular areas that directly impact you: local funding applications and the Performance Accountability System. The Act contains changes that affect how North Carolina will award funds to local adult education agencies like CPCC. Remember, the revised application will not go into effect until the 2016-2017 program year, so we have time to prepare. The definition of eligible provider increases the importance of all eligible applicants having demonstrated effectiveness in providing adult education and literacy services. The list of eligible providers under WIA was a definitive list of providers who could apply for funds. WIOA contains provisions that make the list illustrative, allowing any organization of demonstrated effectiveness eligible to apply for funds. That means there could be increased competition for federal Title II funds in Mecklenburg County. The local funding application process will change as well. Title I-B requires Title II applicants to submit their applications to local workforce boards for alignment with local plans. More guidance on this will be forthcoming once the final regulations are released in January 2015. Other changes in WIOA affect the actual application itself. The 12 considerations under WIA used in the application process have been revised, adding an emphasis to alignment of local adult education programs to local workforce plans and one-stops, as well as coordination of support services. We will study these considerations more closely in the next few slides. So let's begin by examining the 13 considerations that the State Office will use in developing our new local funding application for the 2016-2017 program year. Several of them are very similar to past applications, but there are a few new twists. At the end of this tutorial, we will explore some actions we can begin taking now to ensure that we have the services and activities in place for a competitive application. In the application, we will need to describe the degree to which our program is responsive to regional needs as identified in the local plan and to serving individuals who are most in need of adult education and literacy activities, including those with low levels of literacy and English language learners. We will also need to demonstrate our ability to serve eligible individuals with disabilities, including learning disabilities, in addition to our past effectiveness in improving the literacy of eligible individuals and meeting the performance measures. The fourth consideration addresses the extent to which we can demonstrate alignment between our proposed activities and services and the strategy and goals of the local plan, as well as activities and services of the one-stop partners. In the application, we will also need to document that our program and services are of sufficient intensity and quality and based on the most rigorous research available so that participants achieve substantial learning gains, including the essential components of reading instruction. We will also need to describe how our educational activities are based on best practices derived from the most rigorous research available. Technology is an important and required component. We will need to describe how our activities involve the effective use of technology, including distance education, and how technology results in an increase in the amount and quality of learning. During the past several years, we have placed a heavy focus on contextualized instruction. We will continue this focus because it helps our students learn, and we will need to explain in our application how our activities provide learning in context, including through integrated education and training, so that learners acquire the skills needed to transition and complete post-secondary education and training programs, obtain employment, and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Similar to previous applications, we will need to show that we have well-trained instructors, counselors, and administrators who meet any minimum qualifications established by the state, and that they are provided high-quality professional development. As you've seen so far, WIOA includes a very strong focus on alignment and integration of services across the workforce development system. Therefore, in our application, we will need to demonstrate how our activities coordinate with other available education, training, and social service resources in the community. We will also need to illustrate that we offer flexible schedules and coordination with federal, state, and local support services such as childcare, transportation, mental health services, and career planning. We will describe how we use a high-quality information management system that has the capacity to report measurable participant outcomes and to monitor program performance. And finally, we will need to demonstrate our area's need for additional English language acquisition programs and civics education programs. Additional guidance will be provided on the application criteria following the release of the federal regulations in January. As the stakeholders come together to prepare the North Carolina Unified State Plan, more specific guidelines will be outlined as well. So as you can see, we are still very early in the game. We have plenty of time to prepare. However, it's never too early to start. At the end of the tutorial, you will receive some ideas of actions we can take now. Now, let's take a look, though, at revisions to the Performance Accountability System. Similar to the Workforce Investment Act, or WIA, the Performance Accountability System is critical in assessing the effectiveness of programs, with the goal of ensuring that individuals served attain the skills needed to succeed in the 21st century economy. WIOA makes significant changes in the provisions related to the Performance Accountability System. Under the current performance indicators in WIA, Title II includes its own set of performance indicators under which our program is measured. These indicators are the basis for the national reporting system and require us to measure demonstrated improvements in reading, mathematics, and English language proficiency. Additionally, we measure employment outcomes, placement in post-secondary education or training, and attainment of a high school diploma or its recognized equivalent. The performance indicators under WIOA add new employment outcomes on earnings and effectiveness in serving employers. and include educational measures for credential attainment and measurable skill gains. Let's take a closer look. WIOA describes 6 primary performance indicators on which all core programs are required to report. These measures include key employment indicators, such as the percentage of program participants who are in unsubsidized employment during the second and fourth quarter after exit, median earnings of program participants who are in unsubsidized employment during the second quarter after exit, and a new measure related to effectiveness in serving employers. The Secretaries of Education and Labor, in consultation with a wide group of stakeholders, will issue definitions for the measures to ensure nationwide comparability of performance data. The performance indicators also include education outcomes related to credential attainment and measurable skill gains. The attainment of a secondary school diploma or its equivalent may be counted for performance purposes only if the participant has also entered or retained employment or is in an education or training program leading to a post-secondary credential within 1 year after exit. This represents a significant change from how success was counted for high school completion under WIA. The education indicators also include the percentage of participants who, during a program year, achieve a measurable skill gain. Measurable skill gain will be defined in the federal regulations. The federal report accompanying WIOA specifically recognizes the importance of serving individuals who have low levels of literacy or English language learners. This report clarifies the term measurable skill gains as an encouragement to adult education providers to serve undereducated, low-level, and underprepared adults, which is the primary purpose of the adult education program. As part of the state plan, North Carolina must come to agreement with the Secretaries of Education and Labor to establish adjusted levels of performance for each of the indicators. A new provision for establishing targets requires states to adjust levels of performance based on a number of factors, including comparison with targets established by other states and objective statistical models taking into account economic conditions and characteristics of participants. While WIA allowed eligible states to receive incentive awards for exceeding their adjusted levels of performance in Title I and Title II, WIOA eliminates the incentives. Instead, there are sanctions for states that fail to meet the targets. Under WIA, states that exceeded their performance targets in both Title I and Title II are eligible to receive incentive awards to support innovative workforce development and education activities. However, under WIOA, if a state fails to meet its target, the secretaries must provide technical assistance and assist in the development of a performance improvement plan. If a state fails to meet its target for a second consecutive year or fails to submit a state performance report for any program year, the Governor's Reserve Fund for statewide workforce investment activities must be reduced by 5%. In the event that a state fails to meet its target in the third consecutive year, the Governor must take corrective actions. Another important element in the WIOA performance accountability system is evaluation. WIOA creates a new evaluation requirement that supports increased transparency and program improvement. The law requires states to conduct ongoing evaluation of core program activities. The evaluations must be designed to use the most rigorous analytical and statistical methods that are reasonably feasible. The state is also required to prepare and submit the reports on the results of these evaluations and make them publicly available to promote the efficiency and effectiveness of the workforce development system. The new performance accountability system goes into effect in July 2016. Obviously, between now and then, significant changes will more than likely be made to the national reporting system, so stay tuned. So hopefully, you now have a better idea of what you can expect in the performance accountability system and the application process under WIOA. The first tutorial ended with several action steps you could take to begin getting ready for WIOA.
We'll conclude this tutorial with some additional ideas of things you can start on now to stay ahead of the game.
We need to look more closely at our local and regional data on educational attainment, demographics of our target population, the occupational outlook, where are the high-demand jobs, as well as employment and poverty data. Then, we need to compare the data to the student population we are serving. Do our student demographics match the demographics of those without a high school credential or in need of English literacy in our region? Are there gaps? Do we need to adjust our recruitment efforts? Based on the occupational outlook information, are our career pathways aligned with the higher demand jobs? Are there new pathways we need to create? Our local application will be strengthened if we can show how our planned activities are directly aligned to high-demand jobs. With the integration of EL Civics into WIOA, there is an increased focus in ESL on employability and the workforce system. That is one reason why the Act also includes teaching math for English language learners. Traditionally, many of our ESL classes have primarily focused on reading, speaking, and listening skills. Under WIOA, we will want to make sure that we are equipped to provide both math instruction and employability skill training to our ESL students. With a focus on transition to post-secondary education and employment so prevalent throughout WIOA, we will also want to assess our ESL curriculum. Does it include sufficient rigor to get an ESL student college ready? How many of our current career pathways are ones in which ESL students could be successful? These are the types of questions we will want to start asking now. Now is also a good time to evaluate our integration of employability skills. How can we maximize the integration of HRD coursework, the Working Smart Soft Skills curriculum, digital literacy, career exploration, and other employability topics into our instructional delivery model? And not just for pathways or way to work students, for all students. Focus on program improvement and our performance measures. Past program effectiveness will be critical. We need to show that our program is capable of meeting the performance indicators related to educational gains, employment, and transition to and enrollment in post-secondary education and job training. How will we measure up in 2016-2017? What can we do now to strengthen our performance outcomes? During the next 2 years, we will be analyzing our data very carefully on a class-by-class basis and determining strategies that will strengthen our student outcomes. How research-based are our activities? We will need to illustrate in our application how we are integrating research-based best practices into our program. Now is a good time to study the best research available on adult learning topics. Assess what you are currently doing. Pilot and integrate new promising practices, and be ready to document those research-based practices in our application.
This concludes the second tutorial. Additional tutorials will be developed as we receive more definitive information about the regulations for WIOA. Remember, we have time to get ready, so take your time and do it right. Our students depend on it.